All right, Mike Demergis here along with Jersey Joe Archino. A day after the New York Mets advance to the National League Championship, Joe. And you know what? Give them credit. They did it in grand fashion.
No question about it. I think there's so many storylines to start with here. It's good to see, though. I mean, look, I'm a Dodgers guy, so it's a little bit tough to watch, but you got to be excited about the fan bases, the Cubs fan base, the Mets fan base. You have two teams that have been waiting for so long, finally set to clash. You really can't write it any better.
You know, I can't believe it's been 9 years when I was working at XM, and I'm in the tunnel, top of the ninth inning, Game 7 against the Cardinals with Buck Martinez, and Molina hits that home run to knock the Mets out of the playoffs and their dreams of going to the World Series in 2006. And let's face it, I think they were the best team in baseball at the time.
Yeah.
They just suffered some pretty big injuries with Pedro and El Duque right before the playoffs started. Also, Cliff Floyd was hurt. That place all of a sudden was dead silence. It went from being raucous to silence. And it's been 9 years. 9 years since the Mets have been in the playoffs. So good for them. Another chance to go to the World Series. Last time they were there was in 2000 against the Yankees. The Yankees took that in 5. And the Mets haven't won a World Series since 1986. Almost 30 years ago. Think about that. I was younger than you the last time the Mets were in a World Series.
It just, I mean, that's the thing. You look at the Mets, Cubs, obviously, it's been a few years longer than that one. But it's an interesting one because I think you look at it right now, and realistically, I don't know how many people thought they could get past the Dodgers, but they did. And they continue that momentum, and they have the pitching that they have. They get the timely hitting that they do, and that's what all the postseason comes down to. Do you have the pitching? Do you have the depth in your pitching in the bullpen? And do you have the timely hitting? The Mets have those things right now, and it's both young sides clashing. I think that's what baseball was missing for so long, is they didn't have those identifiable young stars. The Cubs have a full roster full of them. The Mets have
Anthony
a ton
Rizzo
of
and Chris Bryant are incredible.
It's exactly
Jake
what the game
Arrieta,
needs.
And you've got now for the Mets, DeGrom and Syndergaard. I mean, the young pitching is incredible, and the great thing for the Mets organization, they control these players for years.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, they could ride these arms for the next 3-4 years, and continue to build parts around them. And for the Mets, DeGrom did not have his best stuff. He gutted it out, got the big outs when he could, and he showed he didn't choke under the pressure. He was made for the situation.
And that's the thing. You kind of look at him, and I think that's something you could say about even Harvey, too. I mean, these are just guys who really aren't phased. I think you look like across the other side. Kershaw's been knocked up a little bit during these playoff games. Greinke sometimes as well. But not those guys just seem to be unfazed by the situation and how big it is. And when you have young guys like that and you're going up in these big stages, I don't know how much better you could want.
When I was growing up, for the Yankees at the time, it was Ron Guidry who was big in the big playoff games. And if you look at his record, incredible in the postseason. Also, he had some great years there in the late 70s, early 80s. You know, if Kershaw came up big over the last few years instead of what he is, I believe it's 1-6 in the postseason.
Yeah.
Maybe the Dodgers have a world championship. And he did not come up big. He didn't pitch awful in the first outing against the Mets.
He did not.
But sometimes you got to throw a 1-0 game. I remember Game 5 against the Yankees '96. Not Maddox. It was Smoltz against Pettit, and Pettit beat Smoltz 1-0. 1-0. Sometimes you got to pitch a great game. You have to pitch like Tom Seaver or Catfish Hunter when the time comes, and Kershaw has not. And so far, DeGrom and Syndergaard, are showing their worth early on here, not phased by anything, like you said.
They have, and all the storylines this morning in L.A., obviously Greinke, it seems like he's going to opt out of his contract, and now Don Mattingly is the one. It seems like he's the next one on the way out.
That was hard to see. That was even ahead of that, but now we had the verbal volleyball going on with Andre Ethier, who's saying it was the umpire. Still, you don't bark at Don Mattingly like that. That would never happen in New York. If Don Mattingly was manager of the Yankees, that would never happen. That was an outright disgrace by Ethier. And you could see this team now just coming apart at the seams, a $300 million payroll, and they can't win. They can't get to the World Series. And they've been there several times since 2007. Since 2008 when Joe Torre.
I mean, all you got to look is who was their best player these playoffs? Justin Turner.
Yeah, Justin Turner.
That was their best, most consistent player. And I mean, I love Turner. I love his hustle. I love the way he plays. But you have Puigs and Ethiers, guys who cause problems. And when you have this roster made up of such a big payroll, clearly it's not working. And that Mattingly is obviously going to take the fall for it, but there's a lot of problems with the Dodgers. And you look across to the Mets, the young talent, the way things mesh, I think there's really a bond. And I think when you have young players like that, it's easier
Absolutely.
for them
Players
to get
that
together.
come up together in the minor leagues and know the coaches from the minor leagues, it makes a difference. It absolutely makes a difference. And the Mets pitching staff kept them in games until July. And you look at the teams that made the playoffs this year. At least half of them made big moves in the midsummer at the trading deadline. You look at Texas, they got Cole Hamels. Look at the Mets, they got Cespedes. You look at who else do we got here? You got the Blue Jays, who picked
obviously
up
David
Chulo
Price.
and David Price. You know, the teams that made the moves at the trade deadline are the ones that have advanced and are going on now to deep into the postseason. So it goes to show you've got to make moves to invigorate your team. It just has to be done. Like the Rangers went to Game 5 with Toronto.
100%.
The Mets, if they didn't get Cespedes, they wouldn't even be near the playoffs right now.
No.
Not even near the playoffs, okay? And you look at teams like the Yankees, they didn't do really anything, and look where they are, okay? So you got to make some moves at the trading deadline. That's one thing I've taken from the playoffs. Number two is that home field doesn't matter.
No.
It doesn't matter in the playoffs. In Game 5 or whatever. Actually, home teams they're playing home in Game 5 has a losing record.
Yeah.
Which is shocking. So also I took from the series Daniel Murphy is going to be a hot free agent. He'd look mighty good in pinstripes if you're the Yankees.
I've thought for years he's the perfect guy the Yankees need. I mean, he's just a guy who just. I mean, even you saw times in that game last night, his heads up plays on the base pass.
I didn't see that all year. Ron Darling pointed that out.
He's a smart baseball IQ guy. He's always a guy whose numbers are just good. He's just a good all-around baseball player, a good clubhouse guy. Any team would be lucky to have a guy like Daniel Murphy.
And Carlos Pena on the Baseball Network was talking about how was really breaking down on how Murphy was really zoning in on Greinke, and Greinke went from the wind-up to the set to try and mix him up, and Murphy was just in his zone. He was just in his zone last night, and I'm thinking, I said, this guy's going to hit a home run. I just felt it in my bones that this guy was going to hit a home run, and he did. And certainly, he's been talking about trade rumors earlier in the year, and then, they let him go. Mets got to sign him. The Mets got to keep the offense because they're probably not going to keep Cespedes.
He's might be as integral part of that offense as Cespedes has been. I mean, his numbers are always around that 300 area. He's always as consistent hitter. They're hard to come by in the MLB today. There's not a lot of guys who can keep those numbers as consistent as he does.
And he doesn't get rattled. That's the biggest thing in the playoffs. He does not get rattled. He's a very down-to-earth, very loosey-goosey kind of guy. So now we got the Blue Jays against the Rangers, a rematch of 1985. Ironically, when the Blue Jays were up 3-1 against Kansas City, and the Royals came back and took 3. And, of course, we have, and this is going to be real raucous, the Mets against the Cubs, teams with great young players, fan base that are starved, and also former NL East rivals.
Yes.
So, and here's the thing about the Mets. Even going back years, I remember when they had the great teams in the 80s, they couldn't win in Wrigley. There's just a weird dynamic to Wrigley that the Mets historically have not been able to win there.
I just think, you look at the numbers of this postseason so far from an audience perspective. The numbers are all better than they've been in a long time.
Let me tell you, the Cubs are a national grabber.
100%.
When the Red Sox made their run, grabbed national attention. There's just something. There's a national appeal of the Cubs not winning since over 100 years ago, going back to 1906, 1908 or 6?
1908.
1908. So there's a national appeal. There's a storyline there. There's that empathy feeling. So absolutely have national appeal, and the ratings just for the Mets, young pitching, and then you have the Canadian contingent as well now. The Jays not in the World Series since 1993.
And I think in baseball, it's one of those things where, look, people want to see runs for the most part. People like to see the good pitching too. But the Blue Jays, that's one thing that they've been able to hold their hat onto all years. That offense, how deadly it is, and it's carried over. And I think you look at both series, I don't know how much certainty there is if you could really have a good feeling either way. I think they're as close cut as this entire postseason has been, and that just fuels even more excitement to everything.
Well, it's Mets and Cubs, Blue Jays and Royals, and hopefully the Cub fans, they don't have to sacrifice any goats. For the New York Sports Machine, I'm Mike DeMurgis, along with Jersey Joe Archino.